So feel free to ask as many questions while I'm going through this as you'd like. So just I put a lot of story-related titles on all of these slides since that's the topic today. And our origin story is basically the No Kid Hungry direct mail program and direct response program really started in 2011 and 2012. So Share Our Strength is the organization that I work for. We've been around since the 80s, but the No Kid Hungry campaign and the main cause that we fundraise for really started just a handful of years ago. So we had a really small program, 3 acquisition mailings and 7 house mailings a year. And a lot of them really just relied on very kind of dry, stilted stat language, moonshot language, and No Kid Hungry was always the focus. It was very rare that we were trying to figure out ways to make the stories and make the numbers relate to the donor. So we've grown a lot. We're now mailing about 12 house mailings and 10 acquisition mailings a year. And so we wanted to be able to make sure that while we're amping up the volume, we are going out with the most captivating and interesting language that we can, because we want to grow the file, but we also want to retain the donors that we're acquiring. So we knew that we needed to change it up. And these are just a couple examples that I pulled from some FY17 mailings that we had. It is bone dry. So we've got some today, more than 14 million kids participate in school breakfast programs on an average day. That's up from 10 million kids in 2010. So nothing there that really like grabs at the heartstrings or might compel somebody to make a donation. Great for a communications piece, great for a PR piece, but maybe not for fundraising. So we worked with Donor Voice on a pre-test tool where we really wanted to see like what sort of things were gonna resonate with our donor file. So for those of you not familiar with the pre-test tool, it's basically a bunch of different elements that we lay out in a grid, including things like the voice of who's writing the appeal, who and how you help, what you provide, basically any elements that you think could impact your fundraising and your appeals. And then we sent an email to a bunch of our followers and asked them to rate kind of A/B, you know, what elements do you like from this story versus this story? Nick, you can hop in if you feel like I'm totally butchering the description of a pretest tool.
Doing great.
Okay. But we saw here, and we had an inkling before, that these emotional stories would work better for us. So over here, the thing that scored highest with voice was a child's voice. So No Kid Hungry helped my school start a breakfast and after school meal program. Now I can get enough to eat. Thank you for helping kids like me. We also found that like the who and how you help message really resonated when it came directly from a kid and was framed in this positive way. So when I eat meals at school, it makes me faster, it makes me smarter, it makes me think I can do anything, I can work harder to have a better life, thank you. And that did better compared to things like a parent speaking on the topic or a teacher speaking on the topic. And then what you provide. So kids can get free lunches during the school day, but what about other times? Your support will get missing meals like breakfast, after school, and summer meals to kids who desperately need them. So in this pre-test tool, we had a lot of findings that really did show us that it was probably a safe bet to test these emotional stories and get away from some of the more institutional statistical messaging that we had been running with for so long. So the question that we asked was, do solved problem stories win? And what we mean by solved problem stories is presenting a problem in the appeal, but also showing how the donations that our file was making to No Kid Hungry was helping the kids in question. So in our 2018 June acquisition, we included a story about Chris versus a no story control. With I feel like the goal of any good fundraising piece to increase the response rate and or the average gift. And we also repeated a couple of different story tests in acquisition throughout the year. So in October 2018, we used a Thanksgiving themed story about Brandon versus our no story control. And we also tested again in November and December. So what we found was that the stories do work when you're telling the right story. So just to give you an idea of what that language looked like in the CRIS test, it's down here at the bottom. So sometimes we wouldn't even have breakfast and lunch. We would at least have dinner, but it was hard to have food, Chris said. It really gets to you when you are hungry and you wake up and there's nothing there. And then we were able to tie that story through to the call to action. So after we talked about what the donor helped make possible by donating and helping us create summer meals programs in Chris's community, we're able to say, thanks to the generosity of people like you, Chris and his brother don't go to bed hungry anymore. They don't worry about when or if they will get food. And so we saw really great results in July with the Chris story. The test version had a 3% higher response rate, an 8% higher average gift, and a 4-cent increase in revenue per piece. Similar story with the October acquisition. So the test also had a lift in response rate, lift in average gift, and lift in revenue per piece. And now here's where we get into some interesting territory, I think, because what we found out is like, yes, stories win most of the time, but you've got to be telling the right story. So you'll see in November, the test version with the story decreased response rate, decreased average gift, decreased revenue per piece. And then we saw some bounce back in December. So that November acquisition, wasn't the best. We also just rolled out with a story in our renewal, and both underperformed. So what was different? We have some working theories, and those will be the focus of our tests going forward. So the match and the renewal, sorry, I should have mentioned, in the acquisition, there's a match offer. So the match and the renewal are both technique driven. So perhaps layering stories on top of the call to action, match your gift or renew muddies response. We're going to test these theories. So some other things we're thinking about: do some donors prefer institutional messaging and technique driven mailings? We don't necessarily think this is the strongest theory we've got going for us. We have a lot of first-time donors on the file because we've invested so heavily in acquisition over the last couple of years. So we don't feel like a lot of the newer donors were trained by the previous institutional messaging that we had in acquisition. And they likely, if they're more recent, came in on an acquisition piece that tells a story. So we'll see where the testing takes us. We're definitely not expecting it to be the silver bullet. The other thing that's really interesting, and what I'm really excited to test next, is, did we use the wrong stories or frame them in the incorrect way? So just going a little bit more into the nature of the stories theory, November, we used 3 brief stories, what we were calling story snippets, and they really were quotes from kids that talked about the hardships of hunger. And then we pivoted directly into the matching gift challenge offer throughout the rest of the piece. So we know from behavioral science that a story about one kid and having an identifiable victim is more effective than having lots of kids that we're talking about solving the problems of lots of different folks. This ties into what we saw in our pretest tool. So we got the best response from that. When I eat meals at school, it makes me faster, it makes me smarter, it makes me think I can do anything. This quote kind of has it all for us. Identifiable victim, perceived impact, it's really authentic. So, maybe we didn't do the best job of just framing it so it was one kid telling that story in November. January also had this really heartbreaking story about a kid who was bringing home ketchup packets and mixing them with water and heating it up to make tomato soup. Um, and so while that's a really powerful story, it's kind of the mirror image of that D quote that I was just talking about, where it's a identifiable victim, but it's framing the story in a really negative way, which might trigger some guilt or other negative response from the donor that might make them not want to donate. And so the November and January stories are contrasted with these successful story tests that told one story and connected it to how the donor could help. So like October, Brandon sets the tables for cereal for Thanksgiving, and then we pivoted into the call to action, which was, but you can connect kids with the meals that they need. Your gift will be put to work right away to connect kids with the missing meals they need to thrive. So really making sure that we are following that through line, and when we're telling a story, making it about one kid, making sure that we are talking about the donor's impact on these kids' lives and tying that all together with the call to action. And you can help more kids when you donate today. So we got a few things that we are going to do next. We are going to go ahead and test an institutional versus non-institutional sort of message to really see if those technical or technique-driven packages are what are the hook for people, or if we just didn't do the story the right way. A positive framed versus a negative framed story, and then a non-food story versus a food story. And we're hoping that, especially before the next renewal series, where we do have that technique versus story question on our minds, hoping to test some of those concepts in email and Facebook ads, and then use those findings to inform what we actually test in the mail. So, I mean, I know that a lot of people really are focused on donor-centric pieces. I think if you go through your appeals and you highlight all the times you mention your organization, and then you highlight in different color all the times you mention the donor and talk about their impact, you might be surprised at how often you're actually mentioning them. That was a really useful exercise for me when I first came onto the program and really realized that we were talking a lot about ourselves and our impact and our numbers, but not really ever connecting it to the donor. So it might be worth it to test out some emotional stories. But be sure you're telling the right stories for your audience, because as we just demonstrated, not all of them will work. You want to make sure that you're telling a story about one kid, or if one classroom even, but you don't want to tell a lot of different little stories. Think about what emotion and response you want from your donors. If a story is too negative, are you sure that you want to roll out with that and hook that into the call to action? And like I said, make sure you're asking yourself, how does the donor fit into the story? Because you don't want to make it all about yourself. And then, I mean, we're going to test this out, but keep in mind that all donors may not need or want super emotional stories. Maybe there are some people who really are just hooked by a match offer or the call to renew, or, especially as you start talking to higher dollar donors, your mid-tier and your major donors, maybe you just want to show them more impact than emotion. Maybe they want to see like the investment and return on investment that their dollars are making. So that's what I have. I left some time for questions if anybody has any.
So questions in the question and answer section, or we can field them from the chat, whichever is easiest for you.
No questions. Nick, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered it well. And Sophia, you have a question? Okay, can you type in that question, please? But yes, I think you did a good job in the increase in donor donation. So average gift increase. Did you use a different offer amount offer?
No, we have a standard ask string that we use in acquisition. And if we were testing a different ask string, it wouldn't have been associated with the story test.
Yeah, so the changes were exclusively to the story, not to what you were asking for.
Yep. But that's a good question.
Excellent question. Any others? Okay, since we have a little bit of time, I had a 5-minute quickie test in case we had extra time on the call. Feel free to ask any questions of Erica as we go along, because what she has is more interesting than what I have, which is yet another opportunity for me to say, we're looking for folks who are willing to present like Erica. Would love to have your tests here in the Test of the Month group, so that I can talk less and we can see more from practitioners. Can you see my screen? Unit asking effect? Erica? Okay, great.
Yeah.
You're the one person that I could hear, so going with that one. So to Erica's point about identifiable victims, we see that when you tell an individual story, it tends to outperform statistics, and it even outperforms the combination of identifiable victim and statistics. So that was kind of some of the research going into this. But how do you then take an identifiable victim and say, if you have a group of people that you're trying to serve, how do you tell that type of story? So in Erica's case, that's the classroom. In other cases, it can be any sort of group of people. So in the lab, folks were asked how much they would donate to help 20 people in need. Half were asked, before you think about how much you would donate to help these 20 children, answer how much you would help to donate one child. They were asked to write in how much they were so they would give for one child. Another part of the audience were asked to just think about it, don't write it down, just think about what you would give. And then there's simply doing the ask, like we would traditionally do for a group of 20 children. Unit asking 1 in this hypothetical example. So asking someone to literally write down how much they would do to help one child, and then asking how much they would give, significantly outperformed thinking about it alone, which significantly outperformed the control. But will that work in real life? So in real life, a company in China was raising money from employees to help 40 school children who had been through an earthquake. They emailed their employees half with unit ask, half without. An average gift went up 65% when there was a unit ask, when people were asked to think about how much they would do for just one child. Then similarly, in the mail, there was a mail campaign to 101 wealthy Chinese, I guess, equivalent of MBA students to support research of doctoral students. So they asked people to donate anonymously, cash donation, half with a unit ask and half without. There was no difference in response rate, slight difference, but not statistically significant difference. But the unit asking increased their average gift 4 times on average. Now, these are both tests in small sample sizes, but both were statistically significant, worked in mail and email, and in the lab. It's best if you can get someone to write it down, but even asking someone to think about what they would give to support one person before giving them a larger audience seem to work to increase average gift. I will say that these are smaller groups of people. You wouldn't say think about what you would give to help one person now support these 3.7 million people, because people aren't going to multiply their one-time gift by 3.7 million. Or if they do, you're incredibly fortunate. So that was my quick version of an additional test. Any questions on that or questions for Erica? Let me see if there's anything in the chat. Nothing in the chat. So while we are waiting on questions, your questions to be written in, let me give the pitch one more time. We would love to have you present. I know Erica sets a very high bar for nonprofit presentations, but I set a very low one. So you can hurdle my lowered bar and come in and help the community with the tests that you're doing. We'd love to have tests offline, online, face-to-face, telemarketing, whatever format you have. If you have a test that illustrates an interesting principle and one that you think that folks can apply, like Erica did with how you might tell a story and what stories they were finding effective, that would be great. And I'm seeing a question, can I explain how the unit ask was framed again? Absolutely, I can. So let me go back to the test. Okay. But the framing was, before you decide how much to donate to help these 20 children, think about one child and answer a hypothetical question. So we don't have an identifiable victim, but we're still getting them to think about one person. That kind of Mother Teresa principle of, when I think of the many, I won't act. When I think of the one, I will. So think about the one person, answer a hypothetical question. How much would you donate to help just this one child? And then in the writing case, they were asked to physically write into the blank. Honestly, I don't know how you would do that, if you would do that in a mail package. Certainly would not do that in an email, because people's screens would get all messed up if they're writing on the screen. But if you have the boldness to have a mail package that literally asks someone to write in how much they would give to support one child and then expands that out, would love to see it. But I'm thinking the thinking about it principle is something that anyone can execute. So think about how much you would donate to help this one child. Now there are 20 children, how much would you give? So hope that answers the question. Any other questions? Great. As you probably guessed, oh wait, another Q&A. Oh, thanks. So as you probably guessed, I did not prepare a 6-minute additional study to fill in the remainder of the time here. So you get 6 minutes back on your day. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, would love to have you present. Thank you so much for Erica of No Kid Hungry for presenting their stories case studies. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.